CENTCOM reports F-15 and A-10 aircraft conducted strikes in Syria on January 10th. This is presented as strength. It is a strategic liability. The public is conditioned to watch the sky for missiles, a threat profile from the last century. This fixation is a critical error. The mathematical reality is that adversaries are incentivized to bypass this kinetic fortress. The true vector is not noise and firepower. It is systemic, weaponized silence. According to CSIS, the critical vulnerabilities are not on the battlefield, but deep beneath the waves and in the vacuum of space. First, the undersea cables that carry 97% of global data and trillions in daily financial transactions. A coordinated severance event does not require a navy. It requires a few specialized assets. The result is not a military defeat, but a systemic solvency crisis. Second, satellite blinding. Low-cost, ground-based lasers or swarm-based orbital attacks can deny access to GPS and communication relays. AI is now being leveraged to accelerate these cyber warfare capabilities against critical infrastructure, as confirmed by recent security reports. This protocol creates the blind Leviathan, a nation-state with the most powerful military in history, suddenly deaf, dumb, and blind. An aircraft carrier group becomes a multi-billion-dollar floating liability. F-35s are grounded. The entire command and control apparatus is severed. The military becomes a stranded asset, unable to project power or even defend the homeland from an enemy it cannot see. The motive for asymmetric escalation is not strength. It is a solvency crisis. We observe a nation-state projecting immense kinetic power, conducting airstrikes with F-15 and A-10 aircraft, as CENTCOM did against ISIS targets in Syria. This is the accepted protocol for exercising geopolitical influence. It is also a catastrophic financial drain. Every sortie, every missile, every hour of fuel is a withdrawal from the national ledger. When a conventional war becomes protracted and unpopular, it transforms from a strategic asset into a domestic liability. Analysts at CSIS have noted this exact dynamic regarding Russia's engagement, where the immense cost and lack of decisive victory creates systemic internal pressure. This is a solvency crisis. The state is bleeding liquidity, financial, political, and military, for diminishing returns in the kinetic domain. The math becomes simple. The state can no longer afford to compete on the conventional battlefield it helped define. Weakness forces a pivot. The adversary is then incentivized to find a vector where the cost-to-damage ratio is inverted. If one F-15 strike costs millions, what is the cost of a single line of malicious code? Reports from eScan highlight that AI-fueled cyber warfare against critical infrastructure is not a future threat. It is the current operational environment. For a state facing insolvency, this is not a choice. It is a mathematical imperative to abandon the expensive kinetic battlefield and attack the opponent's unguarded systemic core. The central flaw in Western military doctrine is not tactical, it's economic. The routine airstrikes over Syria, deploying assets like the F-15, represent a massive kinetic cost for a diminishing return. This financial model is becoming insolvent. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, quantify this asymmetry with irrefutable clarity. A single main battle tank, a $5 million strategic asset, is now systemically vulnerable to a $500 drone. This is not merely a battlefield problem, it is a fundamental shift in the economics of lethality, a principle known as the democratization of violence. The capability to neutralize a multi-million-dollar armored column no longer requires an opposing army. It requires an internet connection and a credit card. This economic reality creates a powerful incentive for adversaries to bypass our expensive kinetic forces and attack softer, high-leverage vectors, like critical infrastructure, using AI-fueled cyber warfare. Every tank we build becomes a liability on a future balance sheet, waiting to be liquidated by an exponentially cheaper threat. The regional instability is not chaos, it is a laboratory. While CENTCOM publicizes kinetic operations in Syria, deploying assets like F-15 and A-10 jets, adversaries are not preparing a symmetric response. They are observing the high cost and low yield of this strategy and exploiting the resultant power vacuums. According to RUSI analysts, these fractured states have become proxy laboratories, unregulated sandboxes for testing next-generation asymmetric weapons. The objective is not to win a firefight in the desert. It is to perfect the low-cost, high-leverage vectors that can bypass a multi-trillion-dollar military. As reports on India's infrastructure confirm, the primary vector being weaponized is AI-fueled cyber warfare. Every conventional airstrike deepens the commitment to a strategy that adversaries have already chosen to circumvent, turning expensive hardware into a systemic liability. The overinvestment in kinetic power, such as the routine F-15 and A-10 airstrikes reported by CENTCOM, creates a systemic vulnerability. The cost per flight hour, per munition, is astronomical. This incentivizes adversaries to develop asymmetric vectors, bypassing this expensive strength entirely. Reports from cybersecurity analysts already detail how AI is fueling a new era of cyber warfare against critical infrastructure. This leads to the doctrine of launch on warning. Strategic analysts at RUSI define this as a retaliatory strike protocol triggered by sensor data indicating an inbound nuclear attack before enemy warheads have detonated. The logic is zero-sum. Waiting for confirmed impact risks the total loss of your own retaliatory capability. You don't wait for the fire. You launch at the sight of smoke. The true strategic liability is not a missile. It is the data feed. An AI-driven cyber attack can induce what CSIS calls the fog of digital war. It doesn't need to destroy a silo. It only needs to blind the radar. When the screens go black, the commander has seconds to decide, is this a system failure, or is this the electronic warfare prelude to a decapitation strike? In that moment of total sensory deprivation, the protocol of last resort activates. The fear of being rendered inert, a systemic solvency crisis for the state itself, forces a decision. The commander is compelled to launch out of mathematical desperation, assuming the worst-case scenario. The kinetic arsenal becomes a stranded asset, triggered not by an enemy missile, but by an enemy algorithm. The deployment of assets like the F-15 and A-10, as documented by CENTCOM, represents a massive and predictable expenditure on kinetic deterrence. This is not a strength. It is a liability. Adversaries are incentivized to bypass this cost curve entirely. Reports from analysts, such as those monitoring India's critical infrastructure threats, confirm that AI-fueled cyber warfare is the designated asymmetric vector. A direct military confrontation is a zero-sum game for a peer competitor. An attack on systemic solvency, however, offers exponential leverage. The objective is not to defeat the military, but to render it a stranded asset by collapsing the economy that supports it. Therefore, the next logical move is not an attack, but a calibration shot. Within the next 12 months, expect a non-attributable cascading blackout at a primary U.S. data center nexus, such as those in Ashburn, Virginia. The event will last 8-12 hours, disrupt cloud services and financial clearinghouses, and will be officially attributed to a routine infrastructure failure. This is not the main assault. It is a bloodless exercise to measure the systemic panic, test response protocols, and calculate the precise economic cost per minute of a decapitation strike on the digital economy. The resulting data will finalize the blueprint for a future solvency crisis.